Right, this is the making a mug tutorial, this time with audio. I'm going to do this pretty quickly, so let's see. First of all, I've created a cylinder, and that's going to be the basis of the bowl part of our mug. And let's talk about navigating 3D space. So there's the cylinder. We might want to look at it from a different angle, so I can option drag in the viewport to change my angle of view, and I can also just click and drag in this view here. I can control option drag to pan, basically move the camera sideways in the current plane, and I can also drag here, and I can zoom in and out by clicking and dragging here, or by using the scroll pad, or two-finger drag in two fingers pinch on the trackpad, or using a scroll wheel if you're using a third-party mouse. So that's how I can zoom in and out, and then I can center on the currently selected object, which is this cylinder, by clicking on here. So that's a quick and dirty guide to navigating in 3D space, and that's most of the tools usually used. There's a couple of other things. This thing here lets you pivot the camera, which is not so useful most of the time. But anyway, there we are. So the first thing I want to do is I want to change the default settings for this cylinder. Now, it's not a real cylinder, it's an approximation of a cylinder, which is a 32-sided polygon pushed through space. Now, if I made that 6, it would just be a hexagon, but I want 24, so I go 24. I also want 8 sections high, and the reason for that is I want to be able to control the curvature of the side of the mugs, and I also want to have approximately square faces here to play with. So that's why I'm doing that. So there's our cylinder. Now next I'm going to apply a taper modifier to it because I want to give the mug a more interesting shape, and that's kind of, I want it to have curved sides, but I'd rather that the curve were upside down. So I'm just going to turn that right side up. Take a look at that. It's pretty funky. Now that's 181 degrees. Let's make it exactly 180. And now I can play with these settings until I like what I get. So for example, I might want to curve outwards or inwards, and I might not want to have a base that's quite so small. So I'm just doing this to taste. Okay. So there's my mug. Now, at this point, I'm going to collapse this hierarchy and make it an editable mesh. So essentially take what you see here, which is a procedurally generated object, and turn it into a mesh that I can edit by hand. But, and here is the warning, this is kind of an irreversible process. If I save this document as it is now and I come back, I can still edit the parameters that I was playing with. But if I collapse the mesh like this by double clicking or by saying make editable, either way, then it's a point of no return. If I come back, then that's going to be irreversible. But this is just a tutorial, so I'm not going to make a duplicate. I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to collapse the mesh. Okay. So now I want to get rid of this top face, which is triangles, and get rid of this bottom face. I want to have something that's more pleasant to manage. So in the case of the top face, I'm just going to rotate the view until it's right edge on. I'm going to area select and drag a rectangle. Now if we drag, we see we've got the right polygon selected, and just backspace to delete them. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the bottom set, area select, delete. But now I want to fill that hole in because the mug does have a bottom. So I'm going to say fill hole, just pick a polygon edge vertex on the bottom, and that's done. So that's the basic mug bowl. But it has no thickness. If I look at this with backface culling, you'll see that these polygons here are facing the other direction. So this is just a shell of a hollow shell of a mug. I really want to make it a real mug. So I'm going to use the shell modifier, which is over here, which gives a polygon thickness. It gives it 2 sides. But that thickness is a bit too high, so I'm just going to scroll this down until it's 0.04, and I think that looks pretty good, so I'm going to stick there. That's my finished bowl. And again, I'm going to collapse the hierarchy, so there's my mesh. So now we'd like to make a handle to match the mesh. So I'm going to go into the front view because that's orthogonal, and I want to create a spline profile that's going to go from here to here to represent the shape of the handle. So I go to spline, okay, create spline, I click to create the first point, I'll create the second point by clicking and dragging, and I'll create the third point by clicking and dragging. Clicking and dragging on the first point doesn't work properly. So if we look at the mesh, we'll see, look, I missed a bit, I need to be a bit higher there. That's about the right spot, but the curvature is wrong. So I go back to this spline, I go into point mode, and each of these points can be edited. Oops, I don't want to create, I just undid that. So I go into point mode, I select this point, and now I'm going to move this control handle, which I edit as though as a point, into the right position, This was a bit low, so I'm going to move it up. And everything else looks pretty good. I think the handle's a bit too big. And let's pull this control point in a bit. Now let's have a look at the cylinder next to it. And that looks pretty good. That's almost dead center. That's almost dead center. Close enough. So the next thing is I want to have a profile to drag around it. So now I'm going to do this a bit quick and nasty. So what I'm going to do is just create a hexagon, an N edge, and you can see if I hide the mug, I'm just going to make it not visible in here. If I hide the mug, you'll see that actually I'll do something more useful. I'll turn it wireframe. So we'll just change the mug to wireframe. So now we'll be able to see what we're doing. You'll see it's in the middle there. I'm going to create a sweep, and the sweep is going to drag this N edge around this handle. So the first thing gets dragged around the second thing, and you'll see that that is not, if I got it the wrong way, yeah, so the first thing gets dragged around the second thing. This thing is way too big, so I'll select the N edge, and I will scale it down. So I've chosen the scale option, but then I'm going to click on the middle thing to scale it down proportionally. Keep going, keep going, keep going. That looks pretty good. Now, let's change the mug back to, well, let's actually leave that for the time being. Let's go back to the camera view. Now, if you have a look, the cylinder, the mug is like has a perfectly round profile, which we don't want. Most handles on mugs are kind of flattened, and I also want to have that. I want to have an edge running down the middle, so I need to rotate this N edge until it's got an edge around the middle. And it looks like that was 30 degrees to get that. Okay, and then actually 90 degrees would probably work even better. Yeah, 90 degrees. Because now I can scale it along an axis. So if I scale it down there, I'll get a flattened axis, and I can actually I don't want to necessarily scale it. I want to scale that wider. And now you can see the proportions are looking pretty good. It's kind of annoying that these things don't correspond to the directions you'd think they would, but you get used to it. At least it's interactive. So there's my handle, and there is my mug. Now you'll notice the polygon mesh density is kind of high there. So what I can do is I can change the approximation angle for this spline here to more than 5 degrees. So as I go up, unfortunately it's not interactive here, but let me type in, say, 20, and then I go over to here, and you'll see that that's a much sparser mesh, which is better, because we don't want to have a huge heavy mesh to contend with. So I'm now going to collapse all of that. So I've now got my cylinder, which is the bowl of the mug, and the sweep. I'm going to drag this in here, so it's now child, and I'm going to import it to make it into a single mesh. You'll see that it leaves a copy of this behind. Let me show you. I'll move this around. So the original hasn't been damaged, but there's a new version that's been copied in here. I don't actually want this anymore, so I'm just going to delete it. So now there's our mesh. Let's go back to viewing it as a solid. There's our mesh. And we now want to join the handle seamlessly to the bowl of the mug. Okay? So I go into polygon mode, and I'm just going to select these polygons. Oh, first of all, what I'm going to do, and I do this in the tutorial, is I scale this. I'm going to change the tool to be oriented to the normal, so that I can scale it in its own coordinate space. See that? This is because it's normal. If I did it global, it would scale it in a weird sort of skewed way, but I can scale it to the normal, and it conforms to the object mesh. Okay. And now I'm going to take the polygon mode, and I go click, click. I'm shift clicking here to get the extra polygons. Press the delete, there's a hole. And now the bridge tool, right click for it. I'm just going to pick this and the corresponding corner I want to bridge to, and I get two nice clean joins. And that is our basic mesh. Okay, now I'm going to refine the mesh by making it a bit smoother. Now I should let you know that I've actually changed the setting. So remember how I collapsed this thing with a 20-degree approximation angle? Well, it looked kind of ugly. So I went undo, 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 undo. I went back, I changed it to 10 degrees, and then I redid the steps that I had to replicate. It's an example of the point of no return coming to bite you. So this is a 10-degree handle, not a 20-degree handle, but never mind. So now I'm going to apply a subdivision modifier to make the whole thing much smoother, and it really looks quite good straight away. But there's a few things I might not be perfectly happy with. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a couple of loops, and a loop is what you'd think would be, but the way it's determined is essentially as being the dual, if you know what a mathematical dual is, of a ring. So a ring is like a ladder of polygons, which you take an edge and then imagine you try and build a ladder from that edge by selecting it. So this would be a ladder around here if I go to select ring. And then a loop is a polygon that would pass around a ladder, or the edge of a ladder if you like. So I'm going to loop select, and I'm going to pick this loop, and then I'm shift clicking to select that loop, and I'm going to bevel. So I choose bevel, I reduce it, it's linear, that's fine, I choose it to 1 level, and then I just drag it around until I'm happy with the result. And that creates kind of more refined edge on that mesh. Now the bottom of the mug is also a problem. So I'm going to select the edge of the bottom face. First of all, I select the bottom face, and I can convert the selection to edges. There are other ways I could do this. For example, I could just go edge on, let me deselect it. I can say area select and then grab it like that, same thing. But anyway, I want to bevel that, so I choose bevel and just go and change it. Now the bottom of the mug is nice and flat. Now, something I don't do in the written tutorial, but I'll just do it here as a bit of bonus, is I'm going to click on this. Oops, didn't want to bevel again. Make sure, there we are. I'm going to click on this and I'm going to cover and then scale it down and then pull it in a bit, and then we'll create a slightly indented bottom for the mug, which is more realistic. That's what mugs actually look like. So there we are. Here is our refined mesh. Oh, and another thing I'm going to do, which I didn't do in the written tutorial, is I'm going to refine these joins, which don't look quite right to me. So I'm going to go and do a ring cut about 1/3 of the way along this polygon. Let me just zoom in a bit. Actually, let me show you exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to select the ring, just to show you the select the ring, and then I'm going to show you the polygons I'm going to cut. So I'm going to do a ring cut. I'll do it about there. And then we go into edge mode, and a bit annoying, so I'll select it. Now that cut is now a loop, so I'll use a loop to select it, and then I'm going to move it. Notice how we've still got our normal based tools there, and that refines that edge there. Now let me go and do a ring select over here, and we'll zoom in, and we'll do another ring cut, and then we'll do a loop select, and then we'll drag that in, and we've refined the mesh there. And here is our finished mesh. So the next phase, having created a pretty nice looking mesh, is we want to add a material to it. So I'm going to create a material, and I'm going to go here and add an image texture to it. I'll show you 2 different ways of doing that. So that's one way. And so now there's let me go to the node editor. There's an image that's pointed into diffuse. And the other way is to do it in the node editor. So I'll delete that. I'll create an image node directly. I'll drag from its color to the diffuse. Same thing. I'm going to load an image to it, and there's a mug material somewhere there, mug diffuse, and I'm going to just drag it onto my mesh. And it looks pretty horrible because it's completely badly mapped. So this is what I'm going to do. Let's go into the UV editor. Actually, we're going to UV editing mode, and I'm going to drill into the material until I get to the image node. I'm going to edit it, and that will show I'm not actually going to edit the material, but I can now see it with the UVs overloaded on top of it. Now I'm going to go into polygon mode, select all, and I'm just going to drag them down. So now if we put all those polygons over here, it's an orange mesh. If we put them over here, it's a dark brown mesh. Put them over here, it's a blue mesh. So let's leave that. But now I want to go and find my polygon set, and what I'll do is I'll select these 4 polygons, and I'll expand the selection. You see, there they are. And then I'm going to drag them out and put them where I want them, which is over the cheetah. So let's just drag it out to about there, and drag it out to about there, and there you have it. This basically shows you how UV mapping works, because as I resize this mesh, it changes the size of the cheetah, and if I resize this bit, it changes the size of the cheetah to about right. And there it is. Now, probably the single biggest problem that people have with this tutorial is they'll get to this point and they try to select for polygons, select their polygons, and they get a discontiguous selection over here. Now, how to fix that? Well, there are two ways. One of them is that you could do it manually, which would be fairly painful. So let's go over here. You could select these polygons here, and then move them over here. You know, zoom in and get it all right. That's guaranteed not to work perfectly. Or you can just select them all and say unwrap the polygons with LSCM or whatever. And now you'll notice that they're curved because LSCM is not quite tries to be equal area. In fact, it might produce a nicer mapping than the other one. And here we go. And that's another way of getting your cheetah mapped. Okay, so now I'll switch back to the modeling view, and I'll switch back over here, and let's do some rendering. So here's my mug. Easiest way to light it nicely is just to throw in a skylight. We'll see which way the sun's coming from. Over here. Okay. Drag it over here. Or you can go back and say, well, let's go film it in a different time of day or something like that. So we can go into here and make it 4 o'clock in the afternoon or something. That's still not helpful. Or I can go over here and I can just rotate the mug so that it's lit the way I want it. Oh, the skylight's gotten in here. I can just go and rotate the mug so that it's oriented the way I want it to be oriented. And then I can render it. I can go to the camera and make its background transparent so I'll get a clean image to work with if I want to composite it in Photoshop or something. So just go and do this. There's our mug. But we can do better than that. So let's get rid of the skylight. I'm going to the camera and I'm going to use image-based lighting. So first of all, I'm going to add an HDRI tag, which can be used both to create reflection backgrounds and also lighting and also backgrounds. So 3 things. It can generate a background, a wraparound background for your scene. It can it provides something for things to reflect other than creating elaborate scenes for them to live in, and it can provide image-based lighting. That is to say, it can create like an environmental lighting setup, which we'll go into in detail elsewhere. I'm going to load a faux HDRI, and because this is a faux HDRI that I've created myself, it's really not as bright as it ought to be, so I'm going to add its power. I'm going to make its power 3 so it's a bit brighter. But then I also need to use radiosity to make it work. Image-based lighting relies on radiosity. It defaults to ambient occlusion, which isn't terribly useful. It's a very interesting technical option, but it doesn't produce the effect we want. We want radiosity. I remember when radiosity was just so prohibitively expensive to do that nobody ever did them unless it was like for a hero shot, but we can do radiosity quite quickly. So I've got my lighting and I've got my HDRI light source background. I don't want to render a background, so I'm going to check that off. And in here, you almost always want detail detection. Never really hurts. So those 2 settings, and let me just do a render. But it looks pretty good, but it's a bit flat looking. And that's because we're still using fake reflections from specular, and specular and image-based lighting don't work together very well. And specular doesn't work very well for anything really. I'm going to turn off specular, make it black, and then I'm going to make the mug slightly reflective. And if you look over here, it's all become more reflective. But I don't want it to be super shiny reflective. I'm going to just blur it a bit. 0.5. Let's make it 0.1. I think it's 0.5 in the tutorial. You'll see that those highlights, if you look really closely, you'll see those highlights have gotten a bit blurrier. And now I'm going to render again. And what you'll see is that the render just comes to life. It's chalk and cheese, or just as it's coming to life. Look here. There's no highlights here. There's no highlights here. And now we've got these like subtle reflections from the environment coming up. But you'll also see like the object reflecting onto itself. But it's not in your face reflective like one of those like chrome ball renderings that were so popular in the 80s. I don't know why I got a beach ball there, but anyway. Yeah, they're just makes for a very nice, simple way of rendering. So a couple of takeaways here. If you want to create a nice render quickly, having a nice HDR to play with is a really good way of getting nice renders that look great and are fast. And if you don't have one, then Skylight is also a pretty good way of getting a render that looks pretty good and fast. The real problem with Skylights is that if you want reflections, you have to turn on geometry, and the geometry also renders in the background for some reason. There's no option to have like the geometry visible in reflections but not in the background. And the geometry for Skylights looks terrible as a background. It looks good in reflections but looks terrible as a background. There are some ways around that which I get into later in the book. So let's summarize what we've done here. We started off by creating a mesh, a basic mesh, and then we refined that mesh. We started off with a bowl, and then we added the handle, and we joined the two things by importing the handle into the parent and throwing away the original handle, and then bridging it to join the two. Then we refined that mesh by using bevel and by ring cut to improve the shape of the mesh. I also used cover on the bottom this time, which I didn't do in the book. And then we added a texture map, a material, and we UV mapped it using some brute force techniques, but they worked rather well, which put the cheetah where we wanted it and made the rest of the mug blue, and everything seamless and matching. Then we rendered it using a skylight, and finally we rendered it using an HDRI setup, image-based lighting. So that's it. Mug tutorial, very quick, and also gives you a kind of a bird's eye view of all of the capabilities of Cheetah 3D except animation.